And well, after a prolonged delay, Canada has for the first time ever admitted that pro-Khalistani extremists are using its land to promote anti-India elements. Canada's top intelligence agency says that Khalistani extremists are using Canadian territory to promote their agenda, fundraise and plan acts of violence, primarily targeting India. This development comes after Prime Minister Modi's recent G7 visit, where both nations hinted that their strained ties may soon be mended. It's important to note that India has been raising these concerns for years now, only to be dismissed by the Trudeau government. Cutting across to Piyush Mishra to get more details on Canada's big admission and how this may translate into mending ties between India and Canada.
Well, certainly, Suesha, this is now going to, move ahead. This is certainly going to boost the ties between India and Canada, because for the very first time, we are now hearing as to how Canada's own security agency has acknowledged what India has been saying for the last many years. India has been providing evidence against the people who have been harboring anti-India sentiments. India has also been, giving names to Canadian authorities, but actions have so far not been taken. But Canada has now acknowledged that yes, the Canadian soil was being used to fundraise and also plan the violent activities against India. And for the very first time, Suesha, we are also seeing as to how Canada has used the words like extremist for the Khalistani elements. Now we'll have to wait and watch what kind of actions Canada is going to take against these elements who are indulged in anti-India activities. Remember that this has also taken place in the wake of both the countries deciding to establish, reinstate in fact their high commissions in the capital cities, and this has happened after Prime Minister's visit to Canada for G7 summit, and there was a bilateral talk also which took place between heads of both these states. And after this, Canada's own security agency report is indicating as to how there are various anti-India Khalistani elements are there in Canada, and they are using the Canadian soil for anti-India activities. Remember that India has been raising this for the last many years, but after so many years, finally Canada has acknowledged that yes, the land of the country, the Canadian soil, is being used for anti-India activities. We'll have to see how both the countries are going to move forward in taking actions against these elements. Why? Because India has got evidence and Canada has to act. So we can expect India to further its stand and provide more evidence to Canadian authorities, and subsequently authorities might take actions against these Khalistani elements.
Oh yes, Piyush, do stay on, as I'd also like to get in Pranay into what we are talking about and what he's gathering from his sources in the MEA. But before I do that, Piyush, it is important to give our viewers details of how Canada has admitted to it, especially over the allegations that the Trudeau government had leveled against India over Niger, over all those dossiers that they had apparently put out. The fact that Canada admits to this only all makes sense if they have decisive action against such extremists.
Well, absolutely. We saw as to how during the Niger, incident at the time, the Canadian authorities had blamed Indian authorities, and in fact, we had also seen as to how the relations between both the countries had gone down to a new low. The high commissions were closed. The diplomatic relations were also hit very hard between both the countries. But after Prime Minister's visit to Canada, we are now seeing how the Canadian authorities have accepted the fact that Canada is being used for anti-India by anti-India elements to harbor the violent activities against India. In fact, the planning also takes place, fundraising also takes place, and there's a demand of a separate nation, Khalistan, by these anti-India elements. So after this acknowledgement, which has now been done by a Canadian security agency, we can expect both the nations to move ahead and have some sort of investigation and actions taken against the Khalistani elements.
All right, Piyush, many thanks for getting us those details as we continue to track how the situation now pans out. Timing of this intel report release after Modi and Carney meet, where diplomatic tensions between the two countries are likely to ease. Let's get more answers. right, we'll also play out details that we've got from Daniel Bodman on the very same. In the meanwhile, you see how this has been a tipping point between India and Canada for a while now, and where it worsened over the allegations that the Trudeau government levelled. Ever since, it has been a big strain on the Indo-Canadian ties, but all of that seems to be reversing, especially the fact that this meeting that happened between the two leaders, where they have vowed that they will certainly better relationship. All right, Daniel Bodman is with us on the broadcast, as I'd like to get details from him. And my first question to you, timing of this intel report release after Modi and Carney meet, diplomatic tensions between the two countries to ease up, you think?
I think the timing is not lost on me. I don't think it's lost on the Indians either. I think the invite to Modi was a first step. I think that was listen. I think everyone is quite aware that this isn't going to be a one-day fix. That we're not going to see Canada and India sign a $50 billion trade deal of super friendship, and that's not happening next week. But it's likely that they discuss second steps, and we'll return the high consulates to different places, and diplomacy will go back probably to normal. And this is probably a show of good faith. Now, the CSIS report also does indicate that India is is doing foreign interference in Canada. So it's not like CSIS has totally done a 180. They have simply acknowledged the other side of the argument as well. We're now gone from, we were taking one side, which in my view was the bad side to take, which was the fringe lunatic element supported by China and Pakistan, over a democratic ally. Now we are kind of balancing, where we have two sides that we allow their narrative to sort of go forward. Again, this is a step. This is something that we could then use as law enforcement to source. Okay, CSIS is saying this. So now the Indian Canadian diaspora actually has a legitimate means of filing their complaints with local law enforcement and local councils and local government. They have something they can reference and say, look, this Khalistani menace that we're complaining about, it's noticed by CSIS as an extremist group plotting to India. So the gaslighting of Indian Canadians is likely to decrease, which is good. I think they now have a mechanism to at least articulate some of their frustrations to the local law enforcement, who don't really understand the Khalistan issue, because let's be honest, Khalistan, India, Pakistan proxy wars are not top of mind of everyday Canadians who are not part of the Indian diaspora. So this is another step in the right direction. And that looks like what we're in store for is a couple more small steps forward. I think everyone's hope is those small steps turn into media steps, turn into big steps. But we're not quite sure yet what it's going to take for Canada and India to reach a sort of reset of relations to where they were, let's say, when Stephen Harper left office. Like, if we can just mulligan the entire Trudeau tenure and go forward, that's probably going to require something from both sides, and something more significant. But for now, as a Canadian who believes that we should be cooperating with allied democracies and fighting hostile terrorist organizations and not the opposite, this is good. This is steps in the right direction, which doesn't always happen in Canada, especially in the last 10 years. So yeah, it looks like it's a second step. It looks like Carney was probably smart enough to have this available to maybe talk with Modi, and if they said, okay, if there's a continued cooperation, we can go down, So it's another show of good faith, right? It gives Narendra Modi a win coming out of the G7, right? People say, where do you go? What do you get? What do you come from Canada? He can say, yes, it was a productive visit. Look, we have, CSIS report. They're taking Khalistan more seriously. We're not at the G7. They've lost power. Like, it's seen as a political victory for both sides. Everyone can take a step forward. Now, will we need a few more steps before we get to any sort of resuming of the natural relation? Probably. But again, I think everyone is happy that things are getting better.
And yes, certainly, the big admission that is coming from Canada after this meeting that has taken place. But how exactly has Canada admitted to the Khalistani terror admission and how it has facilitated this on its soil. Now, Canada has gone on to say that Khalistanis use Canada for anti-India violence. Now, India has been flagging this over a period of time, providing evidence to this effect. But the Trudeau government that was conveniently turning a blind eye to it. On the other hand, they were pointing fingers at India. Canada has also admitted that there was a plot to create Khalistan inside India's Punjab. Again, something that India has been voicing for a long time, to how Khalistanis were creating their proxies and a whole force. They were functioning out of Canada, funding that was going to them, and all of this evidence that was presented by the government of India. But Canadian government was not doing anything about it. Now they have admitted to the larger plan, the nefarious plan of how they wanted to create Khalistan inside India's Punjab. Canada has also admitted that their soil was being used to raise funds for anti-India terror. This is how they were mobilizing all of the weapons, all of their men, of how the network was functioning on Canadian soil, fearlessly, knowing that action will not be taken against them because they knew that they had the support of the Canadian government, and there was only so much that India could do while they were sitting on Canadian soil. So this is certainly a big admission that has come. Canada has also said that Canada had become a safe haven for Khalistani groups, that it continues to be. And all of this will only turn if the Canadian government takes decisive action against these Khalistani groups who have treated Canada as a safe haven for decades now. Khalistani terror, national security threat to Canada. So this again is a huge admission that Canada has made now, that there was a security threat and have been a security threat to India. Also, the very fact that Canada has admitted that this has hurt India's interest. Now, all of this that has been a part of Canada's intel report findings, and India now waits to see what translates after the fact that Canada has admitted all this. Let me cut across to Pranay Upadhyay from India Today Global with further details of what you're picking up from your sources in the MEA, how India now plans to take this further, because India has been presenting concrete evidence to the Canadian government, but it was all falling on deaf ears. The fact that Canada has now woken up to the fact and admitted openly that yes, so this has been happening. India will push the Canadian government. How is this going to change?
Suesha, you can say that a better sense prevailed as far as the Canadian government's outlook is concerned for the Khalistani element. If you see, we would recall 40 years ago the Kanishka bombing happened in Canada. And the people, those who had died in that Kanishka bombing, engineered and carried out by the Khalistani separatists and Khalistani terrorists, was mostly the Canadian national. But Canada deliberately overlooked that. Pierre Trudeau, who was father of Justin Trudeau, he was the Prime Minister of Canada at that point of time. And even his successor, his son, Justin Trudeau, did not do anything. I myself have written to the Canadian government asking about the status of this investigation, because the perpetrators of Kanishka bombing were not being charged and they were not being punished so far as yet, and they say that the investigation, despite 40 years of that incident, that investigation is said to be still on. So this remains a big question, and that's why as far as the India's case is concerned, Suesha, India has already given a list of an extradition request to the Canadian authorities. We expect Canadians, if after this acknowledgement, after accepting the fact, because few years ago, India has repeatedly written to Canadian authorities that these Khalistani elements are not only challenge and a problem for India-Canada relation, but they are also threat and a problem for the Canadian law enforcement agencies. They are a problem for the Canadian society as well. They are disturbing the peace and stability of the Canadian society, and therefore they need to be curbed. They need to be checked for the political reasons better known to the Canadian politicians, but they deliberately overlooked it. Good that the Canadian Prime Minister and Canadian government under Mark Carney, they accepted this fact, and we expect the logical conclusion of this admission would be that they decide to extradite those individuals who are finding a safe haven They are finding a safe place in Canada and they need to be extradited. Not only that, those terror elements of Khalistani element and Khalistani separatists, but also the organized criminals, those who are involved in various killings in India, including the Bishnoi gang individuals and other organized crime syndicates. They are also there in Canada, and India has already given a list of around 20 individuals who need to be extradited to India.